Welcome to MoobTube, live from Berlin. This is our third and final account of the various films that we've seen at this quite extraordinary European Film Festival. I'm joined here, as ever, by my regular co-host, Owen. Hello, Owen.
Hello.
And we have the great, dear pleasure of being joined by George MacBeth, friend of the pod, regular contributor. How are you doing?
Guten Tag.
Guten Tag. Yeah, we're bringing a bit of German into the situation. And what better film to start with than a film by one of Germany's most esteemed directors of the moment, Christian Petzold. George, do you want to just tell us a bit about the trajectory Petzold's been on since he began his career?
Yeah, so he tends to be lumped together with a series of other filmmakers who all studied at DFFB, the film school here in Berlin, with Harun Farocki as the tutor. And they, although actually quite diverse, become known as the Berlin School. So this is Thomas Arslan, Angela Schanelec, who also had something in the competition, which we will get to later, and Christian Petzold. And then you have later additions like Griesebach, who is on the jury this year. Now, though formerly a bit discreet and diverse, their main unifying trait at the beginning was that they could see a tendency after the end of the Neue Deutsche Kino, the New German Cinema, which of course you've covered abundantly on the pod, towards prestige films that dealt exclusively, this is after reunification in the 90s, with Germany's past and ignored the present. And so they set themselves a task, much as the neorealists had done in the 40s, of addressing current social predicaments. Which doesn't mean that they were a boring realist movement, anything but. I'm not quite sure what went amiss with Petzold, because
he started working with Harun Farocki. His first few films were co-written with the
and they were pretty close collaborators throughout the Farocki's life. He died in, I think, 2015 or so. And this first trilogy, The State I Am In, Gespenster and Yella, is each of it accords with this agenda to stay it's fixated on Germany's present. And there is the most striking feature of them is this the kind of corporate non-space of Schroeder's and then Merkel's Germany, these kind of
neoliberal spaces.
These neoliberal non-spaces.
Lobbies and kind of industrial parks and incidental roads.
Strikingly
really
non-cinematic.
And one way or another, he went off course in the last 10 years or so, in your opinion.
Well, much as if you think about von Trier's departure from Dogma, back to where he came from to begin with, if you think of this kind of constraint, as it were, he then lurches dramatically with these films, Barbara and
Phoenix as well.
And Phoenix. Well, this is the third tendency, but there's this middle one, Barbara and Phoenix, straight into the terrain of these forgettable, in my opinion, historicist prestige films.
Am I correct in saying that obviously Undine, which was is a year or 2 years old, was poised as being the first in a trilogy whose underpinning principle is mythology?
Right.
So is this film, because I had to walk out of this screening, not because it was bad, but for reasons that will become apparent a bit later. But is this film the second film of that trilogy, or is this a?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But unfortunately, I don't have the crib notes on which.
Shall I just establish Afire, the film we just saw, which has it has a sort of strange. It begins what looks like it might be a love triangle. The central character is a chap called Leon, who's somewhat chubby, somewhat schlubby, somewhat grumpy. He's a flub. He's a schlub, and so on and so forth. And he's a novelist. And he's kind of flailing. He's sort of a slightly resentful attitude towards the world, and he's slightly entitled, very entitled, and kind of obsessed with himself. And there's a very good-looking woman who's staying in this cottage that he's staying with in the country near the sea with his friend Felix. this woman Nadia, who she has an aura of mystery around her. She's Russian, and Leon instantly takes a disliking to her. Apparently, a kind of resentment. And Nadia's lover, this hench lifeguard, kind of
Hasselhoff creature.
Yeah, sort of a Baywatch figure. Kind of passes into this fold, and various, I would say for me, somewhat unpredictable interpersonal dynamics shift amongst these characters. But the overriding feeling is that Leon doesn't have the pizzazz, the charm, the calm, the inner calm to really connect with these people and feel joy with these people. And so he's constantly on the outside of a very funny joke. And then this has, for me, a great quality because, it's just a great depiction of like feeling outside, and yet you're also confronted with the fact that this guy is like extremely unpleasant and rude to people, and very self-obsessed in a very unattractive way. And he's also physically quite unattractive, but that's perhaps more subjective. But yes, you, George, we had an amazing moment in the cinema where we both. I looked at you and I thought, I think. I might mention to George that this is reminding me of Theorem by Pasolini.
Yeah.
And you got in there first, leaned towards me and said, it's actually a bit like Theorem.
Yeah, but what it actually is structurally speaking, it's an inversion of
So Theorem, for listeners who have yet to discover the joy of Pasolini's Theorem, it's a film about a man who sort of enters a well-to-do kind of country house with a maid and a mother and a father and a brother and a sister, and one way or another he not only seduces every member of this family, but also on some level helps them to actualize themselves in ways that are very specific to each person.
Right, and so he is this kind of ultimately magnetic presence played by Terence Stamp, who is also a kind of crypto-religious figure in one reading the film. And now Leon, by contrast, is superbly repellent, right? Like every advance he makes towards anybody within this given constellation, including his closest friend Felix, with whom he's whose house it is that he's there. He sort of this guy has main character syndrome, which
and he is the main character, which is kind of unusual. He doesn't really look like the sort of art house protagonist. So
you're kind of saying, in the way that his early films, you've got spaces that are non-cinematic. Here's a kind of man who maybe isn't cinematic in his own right. It's like located to this person who's not really.
He's got a great face.
No, he does, and he has superb presence, and he kind of broods in this magnificently sulky adolescent fashion. And his age is a bit indeterminate, because when you discover that he's moving on to his second novel, you think, oh, okay, maybe he's like a wunderkind, or maybe he's actually like early 30s but has this slightly boyish quality to him. But all his traits give off a slight air of total ressentiment towards all of the. And he expects everything. So this is, he's in a permanent state of expectation that.
And he also feels that because he's schlubby, I think he has an expectation that there's a sort of pact or a contract whereby he may not be the most good-looking, glamorous person in the situation, but he is at least the cleverest. And this arrogance kind of does him absolutely no favors. And furthermore, I won't spoil it too much, but there are moments where the other figures slowly reveal themselves to know a bit more than they're letting on, and this provides an extra sort of insult to injury that he can't even really achieve this dominance he sort of expects of the situation. Yeah,
and as I mentioned after the screening, I mean, you already discussed the Von Trotter Bachmann biopic, right?
Which is, we did.
This enormously cosmetic, superficial portrayal of the writerly life, and fervent scribbling in notebooks and anguished smoking in bed as what constitutes it. Meanwhile, the character is ultimately sympathetic. But this is, I think, has much more fidelity to the truth of this sort of character, because he is like he's almost like Thomas Bernard or someone, or he's
bristly, difficult.
and to the end, to the
Mm.
absolute, even to the emotional consummation of the film, which is superbly moving. He's unable to truly inhabit.
This is so beautiful for me, and
Reminiscence,
it's something that's rarely seen in cinema, and actually it has an effect on the viewer of, like, I had this feel. So the end without again giving it away totally, because it's a really beautiful reveal. But there is an arc of success at the end and an arc of extreme tragedy, and the two exist almost in parallel. Not well, they come to you almost in parallel in the film, although they're spaced apart. But yeah, there's this. You go along the journey with him. You feel his outsideness, and at the end, you feel this extraordinary ambivalence between being genuinely moved. I mean, tears did come to my eyes at the end, but also feeling this detachment that he feels, feeling this kind of, I can't cry because I don't know how to sort of access that, or this feeling of separation, this distance, which is can also be experienced cinematically. You experience his shame at not being able to be part of the feeling human majority,
right?
And this thing is sort of not, it's very unglamorous, but it's very true. Sometimes we do find ourselves preoccupied by sort of self-important banalities in the face of tragedy. There is a sort of a beautiful truth to it. His inability to connect to all these things that are extremely moving. We can see it as
his profound underestimation of everybody else's work.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
he keeps it.
This arrogance.
He has this motif throughout. I have to work. I have to work. I have to get done. I have to work. But of course he can't, because he's become besotted with this character Nadia. But there are a few other things that, aside from the portrayal of this and the characterization. So cinematically, it's played out against this ecological backdrop of forest fires, which are creating these perpetual infernos in the woods. And the woods themselves are, I think, where the connection to this folkloric fantasy element begun in Undine, which I didn't think was such a successful film.
Where water was a predominant
right,
source.
Exactly. So here you have the fire, but much more successful. I mean, you have a real kind of feeling of Grimm or of Kleist, or when it's hard to go into without revealing too much. But let's say there are wild boars.
There are wild boars. There are lots of nocturnal devices that are extraordinary. There's a game of volleyball or tennis that they play with these kind of LED flashing
that's quite cool.
rackets, which is very beautiful. And then there's also an amazing scene with ash from the fire kind of floating through, which has an extraordinary
I was
point.
a bit apprehensive there, because we've seen at least two films that relied on snow to inject profundity where they felt it was lacking.
But this was
not here again. We're at the seaside.
But this was narratively crucial and also very beautiful. And it's a film that doesn't, I probably the thing that would stop it from being like, one of my really deep favorite films is that it doesn't really visually sing that much. It's kind of it looks very nice most of the time, but it's not so striking. There are these editing techniques that appear maybe a handful of times, these kind of jump cuts that are very well chosen. So in that sense, maybe a bit like Mia Hansen-Løve, there's a restraint in terms of innovation, but it does bloom at various points.
Can I speculate wildly about this
it.
film? I was thinking, so a fire man who is tormented by his own creative burden. It kind of sounds like Prometheus to me, like a mythological character who's for the goal of trying to steal fire from the gods is by Zeus is destined or condemned to suffer torment forever. And if this is not a man suffering torments by the sound of it, then I can't think of anything else. He's this kind of so maybe there's like a Promethean lens for this character. It may be a very, very superficial way, but
it could be, or it could be somehow even more German than this, because Undine was like somehow steeped that. I wonder, and I feel a bit. The film didn't suffer for lacking the subtext because, and the resonances here are with, I'd say, most with Yella, which is the third one in this first trilogy about, which is about them. It's about contemporary Germany, but it's also about violence and the legacy of violence.
Yeah.
But there, you have a very strong kind of mythological strain that kind of seeps into this corporate non-space world.
I hate to hurry proceedings because
Yep.
there's
Yeah,
tons to say
absolutely,
about this, but staying in Germany, staying with this generation of directors, we are now going to talk about Music by Angela Schanelec, a film I missed. So I will now hand the reins over to Owen to.
So music is a very elliptical thing. So I think the film that we're all familiar with in this room, at least, and probably many viewers, is Marseille from 2004.
Four, indeed.
Yeah, it's it's quite a geriatric film, which is an extraordinary, sparse, and editorially quite, in a way, elliptical. Also because it jumps halfway through the film to a different location, while retaining at least one of the characters. Music, in contrast, follows that kind of split. So it's a film that takes place in Greece, and then this takes place in Berlin. And it's a story. This is the problem. So it is it's supposedly grounded in mythology as well. The underpinning myth is it Narcissus? No, it's not Narcissus. It's what is it?
Oedipus Rex?
It's Oedipus. Sorry, yeah, it's Oedipus. So it's based loosely on Oedipus. There's this Oedipal, alleged kind of Oedipal killing, father slaying, so the way this film achieves it is through a series of decontextualized scenes, kind of tableau vivant almost, that unfold from an accident to a storm to a imprisonment, a murder and imprisonment, love triangle, sorry, not love triangle, a romance, and then the dissolution of this romance. The film...
And it should be stated that the dissolution occurs because the guy falls in love with his warden in this
prison.
Which looks like, these jokes you have about Scandinavian prisons. This one
looks like a hotel.
This one looks like it looks like it's been
casting
call.
He's basically, so it's a very sparse, almost like Mormon barn, almost, this place, and he's actually only sentenced to 1 year for this killing, which is not really.
He spends most of his time singing opera in his
singing
cell.
Lieder and Monteverdi and things like that, and Bach. So what I would say is, like, for me, I really hated this film. I thought it was very staid, very poised, often tried to grab for, I'd say the overarching kind of aesthetic look was perfume ad, or maybe Georgie said sort of fashion ad, fast fashion ad.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has the kind of visual, I'd say the blocking and the behavior of actors is done in this very denuded, emotionless way. So you're thinking like you're Lanthimos, you're thinking kind of Dogtooth, and
Does
maybe
it share anything with Marseille
Lobster.
in terms of the layers?
No, because I'd say the difference here, and no discourse, but it's in Greece, and the character's Greek, and it's made by a German director.
Yeah.
And the Bressonian approach here seems to suggest that these characters really are blank and really have no interiority.
Yeah.
And they just act. So we have so much of folding the linen, shelling the pomegranates, watching the football. These like total immersive states, which
almost catatonic.
Almost catatonic, forbid any sense of interiority, much like the characters in a long form perfume commercial.
A long form perfume.
And yet this is mistaken for a kind of
profundity, I think.
Profundity or a Bristonian.
None of the
austerity.
images mean what they think they mean, right? And then and it becomes in some sense ever more desperate as the film continues. So it's desperately seeing everything as a nail, because it's got a hammer, and the one hammer is Bresson, and so the fixation on feet.
Hands, mid body shots,
and like I was saying, fans of Schanelec, and I do think Marseille, and I think Passing Summer, I think it is, and
Afternoon. Did you like
Mitten? Yeah, Mitten. This is a good film as well. And these are all women in a crisis films in the mode of, for instance, like mid Roma, like Delphine or something.
I think the difference with this film is there is the music of the title refers to intrusions of incredibly moving, stirring, quite emotionally anguished Lieder and pieces of song, and then and later pop music. So these pieces of music are what the guy, the murderer, as it were, sings in prison. It's what he kind of sings at home sometimes, kind of, unprompted. And it's later what he pursues as a musician in Berlin, and his daughter also pursues as a musician. And I think part of me was trying to think, is she trying to say that explore a kind of, I'm being generous here, explore a kind of disjunction between the profundity and depth of Western classical music and the unfeeling, emotionless, as it were, world which gives rise to it. This kind of disunity between the beauty of pure art and the world that actually generates that.
You
art.
are being generous.
I'm being very generous. I think that's what
you did just say you hated it. So
I think that's what she was trying to do, because music punctuates the piece. Actually, they weren't really that emotional, these music, but I could see she thought that they were emotional. These moments, they were cutting through the kind of the kind of pulp of the rest of the film. So what I did, I really disliked a lot of the framing. I really hated this kind of compositionally dysfunctional Lanthimos style acting, because at least even with Lanthimos in Alps and Dogtooth, there's a kind of really taut exploration of power, and you understand completely what you are seeing because you get it. You get in Dogtooth what the situation is, even if the situation is unusual. Whereas here, you're left to kind of try and piece together this world from these ghastly fragments, and this whole film takes place over quite a few many years. From, I imagine he killed the murder, which was really an accident, must have happened when he was a teenager.
Yeah, at one point it's revealed that there's been an interval of 7 years, and nothing is done to establish this, really.
No.
And I saw the music thing as essentially it's very sparse on dialogue. For the first hour, I mean, I have to disclose here, full disclosure, I did leave around the 90-minute mark. I didn't make it to the full 100.
10 minutes to go.
10 minutes to go, and I actually
must have really become unbearable.
Waited out past 15 people deep in a row to get out of this thing. But to begin with, all you have are these exaltations of people's names. Elias, John, Mama.
Ida,
it's pretty much the only dialogue we have. And then we have these lieder, which are another form of communication, apart from the discursive. And I was like, I'm sort of sick to death of this pastoralist mode. And especially after having seen what is also a pastoralist film, but with these deeply urbane characters.
In Afire by Petzold.
Exactly.
We also saw a bad, Emily Attiff's.
Which is also a pastoral. But there's also this kind of Euripidean turn, I think, in the way that these, maybe to different ends, you've got Petzold and also Schanelec reaching for mythology as a source of root, a building block for a film. And I think here, it's done in such an overburdened way. You could say again generously that there's a similarity with like Pasolini's Medea, which is also a very taut, poised film where people are making declarations. It's in a way emotionless, but it's an incredibly powerful and emotionally wrought film. Whereas this felt like it was in that tradition of Pasolini's Medea, but in reality it just felt very ugly and cynical and
it was a
frugal.
Pond. It was a pond. It was a puddle that thought it was a lagoon. It really felt that it had was mining great depths of maturity and sensibility, and it just didn't access them.
Terrible.
Speaking of maturity, it's now time to discuss a film directed by a man in his 80s. Is that correct?
James Benning, 80
James
this
Benning.
year. Happy birthday, James.
Happy birthday to James Benning. He's here in the festival. He's not only introduced his film Allensworth, he's also he's also asking questions at Q&As. So I'm told. Allensworth is his new film, hot on the heels of his second film called United States of America.
Yeah.
We all saw it at various points. George, would you like to describe briefly what this hour-long structural film is?
Yes. So we were fortunate enough to see it with Benning present, and he at the outset he explained to us, look, this is a mystery, and afterwards I'd like you to kind of Google and piece it all together. But then afterwards in the Q&A he did sort of demystify it somewhat. So Allensworth itself is a community in California, which was Southern California, which was the first settlement on American soil established by African Americans, and which was built and solely inhabited. And then it was destroyed. And here I'm not so sure of the details. I think there was a lynching.
So I believe that sometime after, somewhere around 1920s, at least 1926, there was a lynching or a burning or an event that led to a lot of these buildings either being damaged or left abandoned, so they decayed into a state of disrepair.
Right.
That's what I believe.
And then in the 50s, they're reconstructed. And the settlement is reconstructed.
Complete simulacra of the original buildings.
Exactly.
Like,
and so this was once quite a populous community. And the girl who tried to access the school during the Jim Crow separation, which then
that's Little Rock, Arkansas.
Little Rock, Arkansas, which then set off the Brown versus the Board of Education bill, which everyone remember from civil rights history is part of the process of ending Jim Crow. She came from Allensworth. So there is this, and then there's Benning's personal connection to it. So Benning had, I think, the honesty that you get as being an 80-year-old wizened former member of Crazy Horse. No, I mean, it's just what he looks like.
Yeah.
To say, look, I came of age in a segregated community where everyone was profoundly racist, including myself. And I subsequently built a shack, not unlike those that you see in the film in Allensworth, nearby, and then I became interested in the community, and now has 531 people. I found out via Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's a small community.
Can I just interject?
That's enough context, I think.
Can I just interject and just describe the viewing experience?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's an hour long, and it divides pretty neatly into 12 sections, each of 5 minutes. Each a still shot, shot on digital. Almost all the shots are exterior landscapes, which center a building, one of these buildings that's been reconstructed. A couple of the shots have a piece of, they all have a sort of atmos from the this still shot. It's very much in the style of his other structural films, just a still shot. Life goes on, often very vaguely in the distance. A train might pass by, or you might see the reflection of a train in the window. It appears as if he's picked parts of this town that are especially not busy, but they're not totally deserted either.
Yeah.
There are some shots where he's chosen pieces of music, songs that relate to black, songs that have black in the title relate to black girls, or a Nina Simone song that describes blackbird not being able to fly. And then in August, because they're all month, each of the 12 installments is of a month. Presumably filmed in a particular month
over a year
this last year.
Yeah.
And the August installment has a young black girl reading poetry by someone else.
By Lucille Clifton.
From the 60s, basically.
Yeah, racial poetry themed around being a black woman.
But one of the parts of significance here, apart from the fact that it's the only human we see on screen, is sort of in the center. There are humans kind of hovering. Yeah, true. We'll get to that. There are many signs of human inhabitation, but the only kind of mid shot is this refrain that she returns to again and again from one of the poems, in the inner city, or as we call it, home. And because what we're sort of seeing here, I mean, you can place it within one of these Lost Futures films, right?
Yeah.
Not one of these like landscapes of resistance style, you know what I mean? That genre. Because after the end of Jim Crow, you see a flight of urbanization and a re-ghettoization within.
And then you get obviously the King riots in LA in the 70s, I think.
But just context aside, did you?
Well, can I talk? Let me talk a bit about space, and a little bit about presence and human habitation. And I think one of the interesting things with Benning is so I'll refer to what he said in his Q&A and what he said in his introduction. So he said in the film there are 5 clues which are really red herrings hidden within the film. So that's one thing. And I think that's Benning being generous. He said that at the beginning. I think he's aware that his films require concentration and contemplation. and they're reflective experiences, and they're not necessarily showing you. He's not necessarily showing you the thing you're looking at. He's showing you something else. And the red herrings is really designed to help you reach that other place. And I think with the shots, there are intrusions and eruptions. So obviously he shoots for a time in a day. He claims he only took 12 shots, so he's obviously probably chopped them down to these 5 minutes. He's humble bragging. I believe him, but the question
there was a process for him where he was like, I will not press record and stop.
Yeah, he's not waiting for something necessarily exciting to happen. I think he's kind of looking at the long edit for each shot and then picking out a moment that's particularly resonant. So that might be the arrival of a train or a reflection or a car passing. And I think these things are interesting because they tell us about a community that has been, as it were, in many ways intentionally separated from history, because it was founded by the pastor Allensworth, and it was created as a space that would be sit outside, like in judicial terms or kind of local government and community terms, outside of Jim Crow laws, because it'd be self-management,
self-governance within white America. Yeah,
exactly. So there's this separation, and there's a later historical separation, which I think for James Benning is the fact that Allensworth has really faded from memory as this site of kind of utopian imagination. And he said, one of the interesting things is that the train track was moved. It had a train station, and the train was moved about a mile or two away.
Right, so it can no longer even be visited.
They can't service this place anymore. So, but you see these trains. So these trains are kind of, I suppose, references to the idea that it's still part of America, but it's kind of detached from America in a lot of ways, and particularly from the memory of it. And I think, so in terms of his composition, you get these, sound is very important to him. And you're supposed to kind of absorb and look into this place, which might be a building, the side of a building, a house. And I think there's a similarity with like the photography of Luigi Ghirri or people like this. And there's, I think we were discussing the other night, and the name Ansel Adams kind of came up as well. And I think,
or Eggleston also.
Yeah. So I think there is a sense of you're required to do profound looking. And I always find with James Benning, they are always very moving experiences at a festival to see one of these films on a big screen.
Actually, somebody said this in the Q&A that he found it a sort of a bit of R&R, because every year Benning shows up with a film.
And it's always a heater.
And and you
There's
often
a salve as well.
And you will have seen any number of pseudo Bennings who think that
many such cases
who won't have, let's say, the structural underpinnings or the structural integrity, but will think that if they just put the tripod and let the rest run, the same effect will occur.
I think I saw it without any of this context, without before or after. And you with regards to the town, the reconstruction, the lynching thing. To quote President Trump, "You're telling me this now for the first time." But I didn't write any notes except this graph. I did write a sort of sine wave graph, which was kind of my little record of context and specificity. Or
interesting.
Maybe not so much specificity, but like context and explicit politics,
right?
Seeping in and then being fully. Almost like an eclipse or something, like fully being a bit like almost like Hollis Frampton's lemon, when the object becomes clear and then
there's a rotation.
There's a rotation as the season goes around, as the year goes around. You find these things. You start to realize that it might have something to do with race. This film with the Nina Simone song referring to the blackbird, and then all of a sudden you're literally watching a black woman reading out poetry about blackness and racism. I think I probably would have preferred the film without it going flying so close to the sun, but I admired the way in which this was structurally thought out. We don't have much more time to discuss this, but I just want to get from both of you your feeling about whether or not that journey worked.
Yes, I think it did work. I think that you cannot separate Benning's like aesthetic and filmic project from politics. Like, I think he's never made any, his last film, even United States of America, was a State of the Nation address to America and contemporary politics. There's no harm, like in the same way Farocki and Petzold make films about Germany's present. I think for the same reasons it works in their way, and maybe Atef fails and flubs because she mishandles the goods, she fumbles the bag. Benning, I think, is one of the best articulators of this vision, because even when it is on the nose, like the poetry reading, it is still tethered to a very structural imprimatur that he has developed. I think, maybe the reading is quite on the nose for him, but also not. I think it's very consistent with his idea of he's not showing you exactly what he's showing you. He's not showing us a person talking about black experience. I mean, he is showing us that, but he's also pointing towards...
The level of mediation is there, right? Still.
Yeah.
And we don't know whether or not this schoolgirl is familiar with the poet.
Well,
herself, or whether whether it's something on the syllabus she's reading it, because it's shown within... Exactly. It's shown within the... Yeah, exactly. No, true. He told her... He said he gave her the book. For the first time,
and she read it. So the interesting thing was, during the Q&A, the word he used 3 times was confrontation to describe. So he said there's a confrontation between her and this woman, this girl, because he handed her the book, didn't tell her anything about it. And there's an N-word in there. He said he was aware of the power dynamic of a black woman reading to a white man with a camera and to say the N-word. She paused and skipped the word. And he found that really interesting. I found that quite interesting, the dynamic. And he saw that as a confrontation. He thinks the film is a confrontation. So despite having, on the superficially, Benning is a passive observer, he's really not that. He's a participant observer in the landscapes and the spaces that he brings to life, I think. So confrontation is an interesting...
And I just want to, and I want to say that as with the Wrocław experience last year and seeing United States of America, the affirmation that, Benning has now made into this, maybe it's one of his 30th films, or he's in his 30s, I think.
But he must be 30s or 40s.
Films, and is enormously more diverse than just this long, iterative, late style of 10 skies, 10 cigarettes, 20 cigarettes, etc. His 80s work in particular. But it's... it really does feel like the iteration and the finessing of a painterly mode and a poise and a grace and an understanding of filmic vernacular, which is that of really being in the presence of someone with control over what they're doing.
Okay, next up, we are going to make a quite quick whistle-stop tour through a small handful of films that we saw, where only one of us saw the film. So we'll talk for about 2 minutes and we'll be quite strict on time. I'm going to start with Home Invasion by Graeme Arnfield, which was part of the Forum Expanded section of the festival. Full disclosure, Graeme is a friend, and I got a drink with him before the screening. But I will give my honest responses to the film.
Cash for honours.
Yeah. I liked it very much. It is a film that doesn't shy away from didacticism. It has intertitles, constant intertitles that are in a sense reminiscent of silent film. It is shot entirely, also reminiscent of silent film and of The Wheel by Paul Gans. There is a circular frame throughout the whole film. It is essentially a history of the doorbell, which uses it tells the doorbell through four different stages with a kind of coda at the end. It starts off talking about a woman in the 80s, I believe, a black woman who installed who came up with the idea for a video doorbell because she felt so unsafe in her house because people were burgling her all the time. It then skips to talk about a man called Jamie Siminoff who founded the company which is now known as Ring, which is owned by Amazon, which you may well have seen, especially in America, these video devices that record to an app who is at your doorbell. Graeme has managed to source, I'm sure there's a huge pool of footage that he had to source from, an infinity pool. He's managed to source extraordinary You've Been Framed style collage of clips of bizarre things happening at the thresholds of people's houses, which has this extraordinary tension of sort of waiting for the thing to happen. The reason why this has been taken out of the surveillance pool and into a kind of a different context. It's magnificently structured. It evokes Hito Steel. It evokes Harun Farocki. It evokes Adam Curtis, and I don't necessarily say that critically, although I think there were moments where I was unsure about the didactic voiceover, but it kind of won me over. Maybe that's partly because I think he's just generally more politically switched on than Curtis. There is obviously a lot of E.P. Thompson and a lot of the history of Luddism, which marks the final chapter of the story. There's also a middle section, which I just neglected to mention, about D.W. Griffiths and his invention of parallel editing, which was inspired by a nightmare that he had Well, they're all based on nightmares, but it was inspired by a situation where he was in New York and his wife was in California, in San Francisco, and he knew that she was unsafe via the telephone, but he couldn't do anything about it. And then it goes through this extraordinary sort of Christian Markley style montage of situations involving parallel editing and involving telephones in thrillers and horror films. The best way of putting it into words is that I think Graeme has conjured the idea of private property into life in a way that only the moving image can, and I thoroughly recommend it, and I look forward to talking about it with other people who have seen it soon, hopefully.
Ding dong merrily on high.
Indeed. And next up, we will talk about Samsara. Oh, and you saw this film, Samsara.
Can you skip me for a while? I'll come back a bit.
I saw Beasts of the Jungle, which is a film about going to the nightclub. It's a French film. It takes place over about 50 years. Not 50 years, 25 years. It stars a very good-looking woman who looks very similar to the woman in Worst Person in the World, but it's not her. And a very good-looking man. It's based on the Henry James novella. It's basically just a club film, but it has this kind of Rivettian, René-ish, Ellen René inspired sense of an encounter that's never fully fulfilled and is constantly based on memory and romanticism. It's a very romantic film. The production design is very striking, the lighting, the atmosphere, the characters. I found it hugely enjoyable. I also found it a bit indulgent, and I figure that it will probably alienate quite a lot of its viewers, but I'm here for bold films that try and do things like that, as opposed to kind of naturalistic films that fail to move me.
Shall I jump in now with?
Please do.
I saw Lois Peña's Samsara, which is a film about death and the afterlife in the simplest way possible. It basically is two things. It's first of all, it's absolutely extraordinary visually, formally. Also, it has issues, it has problems. The film stylistically, atmospherically feels very akin to Pitchpong, very ethical. Has a Laotian setting, so Laos, of monks and jungle and elephants and waterfalls in a way that feels very, very veriethically.
Mm-hmm.
But it also has this amazing, so it really explores like this young boy who is looking after an elderly woman who passes away, and he's reading this Tibetan book of Buddhist afterlife mourning thing. You read this book to someone before they die, and it helps them navigate the afterlife and to be reborn. So again, there's this middle section, which I'll talk about in a second, and then there's a final section, which is it implies it's her rebirth as another animal in Mali, I believe. The final section fell very flat for me, but the middle section is an absolute heater. It is about 20-minute long, intense, rhythmic flicker film in the kind of tradition of Kubelka or Tony Conrad, and also brackish to an extent because it uses colour in a way that Conrad and Kubelka didn't use black and white.
Mm-hmm.
It's shot on film, it's shot on celluloid, and you get this pushing in of the celluloid. I was wondering in the first part of the film, is the film really essential? It's adding nice grain, but it really comes through in a little bit because that kind of insane light flare and bokeh and disruption that you get on the screen can only be achieved by subjecting intense light and variable light to film, celluloid.
Mm-hmm.
So it could only be achieved by that. It's a film where the use of film was absolutely essential and necessary to its effect. Mm-hmm. There's also an amazing 3, 4, 5 minute section in the middle where you hear it's black leader, so just black screen, and you hear just the buzzing of flies. And it's such a bold thing to sit in a cinema where, you see these kind of myopic, Emily Atef, middle of the road art house films that don't really take any bold and brave formal gestures, and you sit there and you're in a darkened cinema listening to flies buzzing for 5 minutes. It's absolutely incredible. The final section of the film, this kind of rebirth, it spoiled it for me. I really feel the film could have ended very quickly with just like an animal being birthed or something, and then that's your film. It would have been obviously a lot shorter. But yeah, it's an astonishing thing. I felt really knocked sideways actually after walking out of that cinema, and I haven't been surprised by images in that way this whole festival. So yeah, it was a kind of a lucky pick. Basically, I just saw it in a list and decided to go for it.
That's terrific. And there we were thinking you were going to see Samsara by Ron Frick.
Yeah.
Ridiculous global
sub Jeffrey Roggio bullshit.
So George, you and I at the very start of this festival saw Rebecca Miller's She Came to Me with Peter Dinklage, Anne Hathaway, and some other actors whose name I can't remember. It is a somewhat twee kind of romance comedy about a woman, Anne Hathaway, who is sort of quite germaphobe and obsessive and neurotic. She also plays a therapist. Her husband, she's remarried, she's got a child. Her husband is this composer, this dwarf composer, played really well by Peter Dinklage. Dinklage is having writer's block. The son who she has had, Julian, I think his name is, who Anne Hathaway has raised with another man who died, is having a romance with the daughter of Anne Hathaway's maid, Polish maid, and this is the source of some anxiety because this daughter is of a much more conservative and much less privileged background. It's a fusion. It's a sort of comedic fusion of what is it? A fusion of George. How would you quite liked it?
Yes. What would I say? It's confusion of. It most reminded me of the Coen Brothers, of a film like Burn After Reading, for instance, or Raising Arizona, perhaps. Also, I mean. He's the name that cannot be uttered on the festival circuit anymore, but Woody Allen.
Yeah, has a New York Jewish sort of neurotic humor to it.
Absolutely. I mean, and the protagonists are a therapist, a conductor, and a kind of sketchily realized working class depiction of tugboat queen who turns out to be, or tugboat captain rather, who turns out to be
a sex and love addict. Which is the thing that brings
she's addicted to romance.
Yeah.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. And this is the thing which brings Dinklage's character off the writer's block. But it's also a scenario which causes a huge life choice for Anne Hathaway's character, who's sort of on the edge of a life of purity, such as her germophobia escalates to a form of complete religious purity. It's kind of quite watchable. It has moments of humor. It sort of formally thinks it's doing more than it is in terms of its sort of aspect ratio changing a lot.
No, I think the opposite. I think this is a product of inattention. Actually,
my inattention?
No, hers.
Yeah.
I mean, this didn't strike me as a conscious choice because what was it? It was not suited to any particular thing. It wasn't like the external shots.
Yeah, there wasn't a codification of it, but it must have done it for some reason. It must have thought that it was such a sort of obviously strange choice.
And you did watch one of her earliers, right?
I did watch, which was sort of on DV and had a more kind of frenetic pace. But she does like these kind of stories, these interlinked stories.
Kind of,
but yeah,
bit of a mosaic one. I thought it was a great festival opener. It was. Most of the jokes landed, although the German audience in our press screening somehow felt otherwise.
Did they not translate, maybe?
Perhaps, yeah. Stony-faced.
We have two more films to discuss, and we've left and two films which probably we have the most to say about. We've got about sort of 15 more minutes we can run for. So let's talk me and Owen, because we managed to catch it yesterday. Infinity Pool by Brandon Cronenberg. Which is yet another film set in a luxury context, talking about people who have huge amounts of disposable income. It is about a writer and his girlfriend who go to this resort in a fictional island, probably in the Caribbean, called the Lil Tolka, or the Tolka people. Very early on in the film, this writer figure played by Alexander Skarsgård accidentally runs someone over, some working class, but he breaches the protocol. He breaks out of the resort for a laugh, for a bit of a joyride, and ends up
totaling
so it has this sort of headless woman atmosphere, Lucretia Martel, a film about someone running someone over and it being erased. But in this case, it's a far more frivolous, kind of stylized in a Spring Breakers style fashion, full of gore and guts. The premise is basically that he won't get punished for this if he agrees to have a double made of himself, which a double person that contains his memories that will then be summarily executed. And then this triggers this sort of strange anxiety and ambiguity around whether the double is in fact him and whether he is the double.
That it almost kind of loses it kind of loses touch with that in a way, because it picks up this other narrative. This other narrative is that there is a coterie of expats and holiday goers on the island who are all obviously foreigners, who have found in this doubling loophole a kind of free reign to commit murder and acts of brutality because there is no consequence. So this is a film that's really saying, it's not necessarily probing the existential quandary of am I who I think I am? Am I myself? It's probing the quandary of without the threat of punishment, mortal punishment, ultimate punishment, would people act? Would they be aroused by bloodlust? And so the film obviously explores this kind of excessive, like it's almost like giallo B-movie Buñuel.
Yeah, it's made in a very clumsy and irritating way. It has extreme close-ups constantly and very
stabbing,
very extreme. Yeah, and it thinks that the way to intensify is to turn things up and zoom things in, which I think is a misunderstanding of like the extraordinary subtlety and contradiction that you can inject the cinematic process with, without going into too much detail and giving too many examples. But that it's very turned all the way up, which makes it simultaneously sort of oppressive to watch at the time, but then very, very banal on reflection. It doesn't get under your skin in the way that Cronenberg's father's work does at its best, or indeed,
I think there's something about there's
also Mia Goth we should mention.
Mia Goth's extraordinary.
There's this really extraordinary, very posh woman she plays. Hello, who obviously
come on, James.
Her basic position in relation to the Stella, the Alexander Skarsgård character, is to be a kind of seductress who takes him down this path of sin, and constantly sort of, whenever he wavers, constantly challenging his masculinity.
Yeah, she emasculates him. He's a writer, so she reads his negative reviews to him, and so taunts him. There's an interesting parallel with this, or the negative parallel. I'm making it anyway, but with Crash, so his father's film Crash, which explores not so much a removal of a consequence, but people for whom consequence doesn't matter anymore, which is people who become erotically fixated on vehicular death, their own and death of other people. And it becomes it's like a psychosexual pathology. And like that, there's a coterie of insiders, people who are united by their kink and their perversion. And this film has this coterie, but unlike that, it is making a less interesting point about, whereas for Daddy Cronenberg, it's the kink and the perversion and that taboo that interests him. Whereas here, it's merely a kind of judicial, would you go mad if you didn't go to prison or because for killing people? It's like, and
I think Crash just gets to the heart of what it is to to have a desire that might not actually be good for people, which is like a very extraordinary and generative feeling. Whereas this film is about is sort of making a nihilistic wager about human nature and human behavior. I compare it to Triangle of Sadness in this regard, because they're both films about the super rich, and they're both films that sort of that imply that basically, given half a chance, most people would just for the fun of it, just out of sheer boredom and a desire for an individualist desire for power, would just oppress and exploit others and laugh about it. And I think I don't like to inject my politics into critique very often, but as someone who has a Marxist analysis of capitalism, I believe people do evil things because of structures of power that have been created, because of mechanisms.
Not because a juridical rule has been suspended.
Not because we're not just like violent animals.
Yeah, cynical.
Who are only behaving because the rules are there. Neither are we, of course, incapable of committing. We're certainly capable of committing these nasty acts, but I would say these nasty acts happen precisely because humanity has been kind of suppressed rather than.
But it's interesting how this has been in the water with Triangle of Sadness. It's been in the water with Westworld, and I feel this is a compatriot to
with
the
White
Westworld
Lotus and
series, like White Lotus, Triangle of Sadness. I think the final thing I'll say, so there's a narrative conceit in this film that he decides to stay longer, and his wife goes home. He claims he's lost his passport, but he's really hidden it because he wants to kill it.
A bit like Sundown, which like
Sundown. I will say, ladies and gentlemen, I lost my passport this morning, so I will be staying in Berlin for an additional 2 days. As far
as we know, you didn't hide it.
I haven't hidden it on purpose. I'm not going to join a sort of fanatical cult of murderers.
Although we are in Berlin.
We are in Berlin, so they probably are here. If anyone is out there that wants to go and murder and commit sprees of violence, hit me up. I'm going to be here for another 48 hours. That's a parody, by the way. Hopefully the police side don't raid this house. But yeah, so should we hit the next and final?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose one thing I wanted to say, just, I'm not a huge fan of horror films. So I think, there probably will be people who see this film and just like get a thrill out of like the squeamishness and the jump scares. But yes, I think for me, a good horror film is one that really gets under the skin of our anxieties rather than like needlessly making us feel anxious.
Rather than making us feel anxious.
And therefore gives us some kind of mediation or some kind of understanding of like the root of our anxieties, rather than a film which just needlessly prods at us, our anxieties for 90 minutes and then kind of just lets us go and and keeps us in a state of boring, banal fear.
Now, moving from one state of boring banality.
From one state of boring banality to potentially another. Last night, we watched the final film, which we're going to review today. In Water, is that what it's called? In Water.
In the sea, no?
No, In Water.
In Water, Mul-an-e-seo by Sang-soo. Just for a little bit of background, Sang-soo is a Korean filmmaker whose work South Korean filmmaker, not a North Korean filmmaker.
We're still waiting.
We're still waiting for that new wave to
get that Juche wave.
It's he's a filmmaker who's largely very popular with a certain kind of corner of sort of film Twitter. He makes at least a film every year, pretty much. Almost all of his films are extremely dialogue heavy and tend to concern. Shall
I pick up here because I'm the one that's like honged myself the most. So Hong Sang-soo's films often he uses available light. His film camera's often static or it maybe pans on a tripod. Very simple. He pays very little attention really to composition. Or to lighting.
Sounds great.
They don't really interest him. I'm not a fan of his what I've seen. There's elements, but they're dialogue heavy.
We watched Virgin stripped bare by her bachelor.
Yeah, you've got grass right in front of your face, which I've seen. And these films often circulate around writers, actors, directors, screenwriters, and
himself
really just reverberations of
there's
himself.
Usually a sad woman and there's usually a few sort of hapless gents.
Nothing really much happens, and
no one has sex.
No one has sex, and people drink a lot of soju. That's the thing. So people get a bit shit-faced in restaurants, and they're often drinking soju, and there's a lot of stilted conversation and awkwardness, and that's just his films basically. So that's the concept. That's the Hong Sang-soo context. That's what you need to know.
And the present moment, the one thing that's slightly different in this case, it seems, is that this film is 1 hour. It is
thank God.
Always slightly out of focus, not because it's been deliberately pushed out of focus, but because the plane of focus never changes. So very occasionally characters are in focus because they're at a certain distance. But
the plane is very close to the camera.
Exactly. Most of the action takes place beyond this plane and is therefore blurry. It's a love triangle, but without any real action. It's a film. 3 people trying to make a film. A man.
No. There's 4 people trying to make a film.
4 people.
Hong Sang-soo is also trying.
He's also trying to make a film. Yes,
failing.
Very good.
And
I like this film. By the way.
It's very much about this dynamic. George, this was your first Hong Sang-soo film.
And my last.
Hong Sang so long.
Let's hear your thoughts.
Oh God. Well, look, I can begin with the things I can praise about it. It's mercifully short. It's 61 minutes. And the foreknowledge of that kept me there. And also the freedom of the blur initially was compelling. and when we left the completely staid and unremarkable compositions of the people, it became quite striking. For instance, the shots of the beach when they're making a film on the coast. That's nice, and I liked this and this kind of twee folktronica soundtrack. But then that's it. I fucking loathed this film. I thought it's completely asinine, incompetent, watered down, like the fifth filtration of something that's already been filtrated twice. The fact that for me, I actually felt that the blur was an omission, that there was nothing worth focusing on or paying attention to in this. It was a sort of discretionary gesture where you might just kind of signal to somebody that they don't need to pay attention to what you're saying.
It's not comparable in a way to, I mean, we keep mentioning Richter, but it's not comparable to the kind of mass culture disfiguration of Richter's blur paintings.
No, I know. I mean, I was thinking about all the like poets of blur, like from Whistler or Turner through Richter to Larry Gottheim. You know, like this does not belong in that lineage.
Yeah, I mean, I think largely Hong Sang-soo has an irritating habit of finding interesting the least interesting aspects of a film. I mean, Virgin Stripped Bare to Her Bachelors, Stripped Bare by Her Bachelors, is a film that is told twice, but in the second version, the characters are a bit different and different stuff happens. And this is extremely irritating. It means you have to live through an already quite poorly made film.
Isn't it quite funny as well, though, that you get like there's a thing of like if you're going to name your film after one of the greatest works of like avant-garde art, you know, it's like a Duchamp, Duchamp's Large Glass. That's the actual title, Duchamp's Large Glass. Then at least, which is broken into two planes. Yes, so there's kind of a clever thing there. But yeah, you don't do that. Don't name your film after a superior piece of art.
But I think what George is experiencing is quite justifiable irritation with Hong Sang-soo, who is basically an extremely indulgent and annoying director.
I find I really did find it the cheapest of cheap imitations, because its celebration in this moment. I mean, I pointed out to you guys before, they are marketing here in Arsenal, which is one of the venues and one of the kind of rep houses here in Berlin, the Hong Sang-soo box set, which comes with a bottle of soju. And it's like,
hit me up,
for God's sake, this lifestyleification.
But this is being enjoyed and appreciated. I mean, I watched a film essay from one of these Hong Sang stands, and I don't think this guy is au fait with Roma. And
definitely not.
He must be. He must have seen. Oh, what the essay?
No. The stand.
Yeah.
And at the end here, we have this absolutely brazen lifting from Tale of Summer. You know, Gaspard's chanson, one of the most moving aspects of this. You know, the song that is originally for one woman, then goes to another, and then comes back to another. He goes on this journey. Right? And we have the same thing done here, but in the most insipid, sophomoric, poorly rendered style. I mean, and you know, I wrote down some of the dialogue. I'd like to see ghosts, then I'd know if they exist or not. I mean, it was absolute fucking drivel. Like,
no, I think that's to be unfair in a way. I think a lot of the conversation is dictated by these kind of empty platitudes. So there's a kind of procedural nature to Hong Sang-soo films, which people rarely break into. I didn't mind that so much because people rarely break into kind of articulating in depth and with nuance their actual feelings and desires. They're not articulate in the way that maybe a Roman.
I understand what you're saying.
But some of their concerns and considerations. I think it's because these people don't really know each other. Is what we understand. There's a lot of it's found. What I found most interesting was its kind of articulation of awkwardness, and while they're trying to make this film. And for me, the blur was very interesting. And it felt like I'm saying, I actually found was strangely compelling, this film, in a way that I've not found any Hong Sang-soo film compelling. I don't think my enjoyment of this film changes my distaste for the Hong Sang-soo films I have seen.
No, absolutely.
I think this one just struck me as being a bit more nuanced and a bit more formally interesting than his usual slapdash compositions, which I find really irritating.
It's possible that you and I, Owen, are experiencing a kind of an improbable relief after having seen some truly terrible Hong Sang-soo films, and this one seems
Maybe
like
that is the recent.
this seems like
bias or-
because I what George is saying resonates hugely with my experience of every other Hong Sang-soo
yeah,
film,
100%.
but this one seemed to have some really beautiful compositions in it. I thought that the lack of focus really helped bring to life blocking in it, which is a thing I never feel Hong Sang-soo really gets, although he seems to try and want to do something with it. And I was, I mean, it was because it was only an hour, I was quite open to this kind of language.
Forgiving.
I was quite forgiving to this sort of musing, and basically through all this banal chatter, we were finding a little bit about these characters. There was a nice bit where this guy is he comes he's his two friends have gone out to buy some food, and then then they say they took a long time because they bought loads of extra stuff, and then they hand him his credit card, which was used to buy them. Just these little touches that set up quite effectively a character dynamic, which we knew we wouldn't see very much of. There are loads of scenes of filmmaking, quite amateur filmmaking. A moment where a scene where a previous scene is recreated and shown being
a
filmed.
Conversation happens on the beach by chance is then recreated.
Exactly.
With a different accent
I like
because-
this a lot, and I think this felt genuinely very cinematic, not just kind of a marginal interest for me as a filmmaker.
I think even the final shot, which observes him
Love the
walking
final
into
shot,
the sea, was
yeah.
very, very beautiful, especially with this blur, which kind of turned it into this very smeared painting for me, and I thought it was very, very well achieved. But again, this is not something he's done before. I've seen quite a lot of his films, and they meet all of the negative criteria that George has painted out that he saw for this film.
I mean, I don't know which harried copywriter wrote the program notes for it, but somebody was saying every shot of it is like an impressionist masterpiece.
Bullshit.
And I was like, no. If anything, it's more like a.
This is writing checks the film can't cash, unfortunately.
It's more like a Luck Toymans or something. Like he bashes out these kind of like desaturated paintings one every day.
Yeah, it's certainly not hard to create images like this, but nevertheless, I thought their ease had a certain energy and a freshness. Sometimes films that can be made in a week are better than films that take 2 years.
I genuinely think this film probably was shot in the amount of time.
I would be very
a
upset
couple
and
of days.
disappointed if it took him more than 3 fucking days.
He works very quickly. That's his process is very, very accelerationist in a way. So
indeed, and we also work quickly because we've managed to talk about 8 films. No, 9. We managed to talk about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 films in the space of just over an hour, and I now have to get to the airport.
Godspeed.
Any final thoughts? Berlinale. Actors in America seem to have won out far more than I thought they would.
It's an acting festival. It's an American festival.
And,
the losers are Western classical music and Black Leader at the start of films with diegetic sound over them. The two things.
Oh yes, we just have beef with that. George, any final thoughts?
No, but
you had a good time.
Had a great time, and faith in cinema somewhat rejuvenated.
Great. By certain outliers from the general normification that we've seen in many of the films.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, well that does us. We will be back in London eventually. Some of us much sooner than others.
We've still got to review Me Hansen Love. We've still got to review Hu Shen.
Hu Shen is going to come.
But for now, Auf Wiedersehen, Petzold.
Auf Wiedersehen.